Hi, everyone. I'm Christy Balla, and I'm coordinating the Insect Status of Insects RCN webinar series. And many of you have joined us before, you know how these go. We have a talk, and then there's some time for questions at the end. The main talk will be recorded, and the questions at the end will be not recorded, so that people can speak a little bit more freely then. So today we have a wonderful speaker that we've had before. So Scott Black is the executive director of the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. Today he's talking to us using the lens of insects, of course, about how nature-based climate solutions can be a really powerful tool for protecting insects, and insects can also be a tool for advancing this. So without further ado, I will introduce Scott. You can take her away there.
All right. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. Thanks everyone for showing up. I always like to do a very quick thank you before my talk so I don't truncate them at the end, because there are a lot of people that I rely on to help make all of Xerces work doable. Well, let's see. It does not seem to be advancing, so I guess we should have tried that. Christy, oh, there we go. First, my family. They keep me grounded. They keep me humble, and I'm doing this because I really want my kids to have a sustainable world after I'm gone. Xerces is a partnership organization, so we own no land. And because of that, and because, of course, land habitat is vital for the conservation of insects, we need to work with partners. And it's not just the land, but all of the knowledge, everything we do is really about partnerships. So, we have thousands of community science that help get data, but also become advocates. We work with thousands of farmers and land managers. We've got a network of over 100 scientists we work with, including many of you, federal, state, and local agencies, dozens of like-minded companies, private foundations, and over 20,000 Xerces Society members who help really drive conservation. And I will point out that we are a membership organization. We're able to do this work because of donors and members. And whether you donate to the Xerces Society or any other nonprofit that you care about, now is the time to do it. Beyond the lack of federal funding, the loss of federal funding, as well as the many issues nonprofits face, if you are able to, and I know some people are students, don't worry about it, maybe someday, but do donate to your favorite nonprofits. It's really how they function. I want to give an incredible special thank you to Xerces staff. We have over 100 staff working across North America on invertebrate conservation projects. And we have 172 ambassadors. These are highly trained volunteers that go out into communities and educate people. And they're amazing non-paid, almost non-paid staff. They're out there really changing minds all of the time. So just quickly on Xerces, if you don't know us, we are named after the first butterfly to go extinct, the Xerces blue, the butterfly to go extinct in the US anyway, the Xerces blue due to humans. In 1940, the Xerces blue's last habitat was built on in San Francisco, and we are here to focus on insects and other invertebrates. And I think we use a pretty proven approach. We work with researchers like yourselves on applied research and crowdsource community science. We need to understand these animals, their habitat needs, the threats, so that we can deal with them. Then we use the science in everything else we do to educate, provide conservation assistance, do our advocacy, policy efforts. Everything we do is based on science. But also everything we do is really based also on behavior change. It's great to change the perceptions that people have, but unless we can do a lever to get them to change how they respond, whether that's less pesticides, more habitat, the many other things, we're not going to get anywhere. So really, when we talk about outreach and education, it's about how do we change people's behavior. And this works. We've so far, in my tenure, protected and restored over 4 million acres for insects and other invertebrates, and improved tens of millions of additional acres across North America. And just to level set, I know you all know this, so I'm not going to really go into it, but I always show this slide to most audiences because why care about these animals? I care about these animals anyway. I grew up caring about these animals. I think they're wicked cool insects and other invertebrates anyway, but all wildlife. But of course, food, insects are the base of the food chain. Food for all other wildlife, biological pest control, pollination, seed dispersal, water filtration, decomposition, soil health, all of that. We would not have that without these animals. And unfortunately, many of these animals are in decline. This proceedings of the PNAS paper that came out a few years ago showed that where studied, and yes, with caveats, insects are declining at 1 to 2% annually. And a 2% annual decline is about 30% decline over 20 years. We can't continue to see this without ramifications to the ecosystems that support us and support all wildlife. And we know the general causes. Yes, again, we have more to learn, but we know enough to act now. And we need to act upon what we know while we try to understand better. So that I think is really the key. So today I'm going to talk about nature-based climate solutions. What are nature-based climate solutions? Well, it's fairly simple. It's using nature to help us mitigate and provide resilience for climate change, right? It involves conserving, restoring, and better managing ecosystems to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. That's like the key thing. But it's much, much more than that, because nature-based climate solutions can capture carbon. They can reduce greenhouse gas emissions related to land uses, but they can improve resilience of ecosystems, provide habitat for a variety of animals, and they can help plant and animal communities adapt to climate change. So it's interesting. I think most of my life I was doing generally nature-based climate solutions. I didn't just know the term. But there are some specifics that you got to think about with nature-based climate solutions. And these can be incredibly meaningful. Study in Natural Climate Solutions found that nature-based climate solutions can contribute 20% of the mitigation, so that's the carbon capture, needed between now and 2050 to keep global warming below 2 degrees C. 20% is nothing to sneeze at. This isn't the only thing we need to be doing, but it's one thing we certainly need to lean in on. And it's because technology needs to be out there. People need to be lowering their carbon emissions, but there aren't other actions that can both capture carbon, provide resilience, and provide directly to the underpinning of life, the insects. There really aren't other actions that I know of anyway that we can take. These things are incredibly cost effective. They're typically much less expensive than hard infrastructure approaches for managing climate risk. So things like floods, wetlands, and natural areas, set aside can help mitigate flooding as well as capture carbon, as well as provide for biodiversity. And it's much less expensive than hard infrastructure approaches in almost every case. But the other side of the coin, what we figured out and have figured out over the last couple decades, is that insects can be a powerful tool for implementing nature-based climate solutions. Many people, when you mention nature-based climate solution, their eyes kind of glaze over, or they maybe don't believe in climate change, some of the farmers we work with. And yet, when we talk about putting in pollinator habitat or riparian buffers or any of the other work we do, they immediately get it. When we talk about beneficial insects helping the environment, they get that. So pollinators, butterflies, and other insect groups can really be a tangible way for the public to respond to this. And the neat thing about insects is that we can conserve habitat and do NBS solutions at multiple scales, whether they be giant in a national park, big in a large farm, or small in somebody's yard. And we can do them both in terrestrial and aquatic habitat. And the restoration for insects works in timescales we can see. We often see an increase in diversity and abundance rapidly over years, not decades. So, you know, Xerces has become an interesting place. When I started, we were mostly insect folks, although I focused on habitat as well. But I would say we have just as many or more plant people, restoration ecologists, agronomists at Xerces as we do entomologists. And that's because I really truly believe, I've said this for years, that plants and insects are the fabric of the planet. We've been ripping that fabric up. We need to stitch that fabric together. And if we, in terrestrial systems, but also aquatic systems, which I'll talk about, if we want to maintain biodiversity and mitigate climate, we need to focus on climate and drought adaptive native plant systems in every ecosystem. And I'll talk about that, not just planting trees. And diversity is vital. Diversity of plants supports the diversity of insects, which in turn support a diversity of other wildlife. And then the insect diversity, of course, maintains these ecosystem functions we were talking about. The biodiversity, it buffers the impacts of climate change by providing an array of microhabitats which serve as refuge to insects during extreme weather events, heat waves, even can help with drought. And then maintaining more insect species, it's reciprocal buffers against the losses of the plants, as well as maintaining insect diversity, as some will be able to deal with these extreme weather events or climate change better than others. We're setting it up to make sure we have redundancy in these systems. Now, most people do think about trees when they think about nature-based climate solutions, and trees are really important. But the key is the right trees in the right place. We do see some efforts where, oh, I can pay $1 to my airline and they'll do nature-based climate solutions to mitigate my carbon from that flight. Unfortunately, some of those efforts have been really misplaced. We've seen planting of trees on peat bogs in Scotland, basically plantations. That is not, you know, taking over a system that wasn't set up to have trees, for one thing, but having one species is not a nature-based climate solution, and it's not a long-term solution. But one long-term solution is to ensure that we have intact natural areas, right? Protecting these spaces will allow them to keep and maintain this biodiversity that they have. And in some ways, I think can help them be islands. So as humans get their act together with climate change and the rise of temperatures, which we have to, because eventually there won't be humans here. We're going to have to get our act together. These can be these reservoirs of biodiversity. I think it's similar to certain places like the Klamath-Siskiyou, which was one of the few areas in Oregon that was not glaciated because of the way the mountains ran east. And it is one of the most biodiverse areas because as the glaciers receded, that biodiversity was maintained in the Klamath-Siskiyou and radiated out from it. So long-term thinking, but thinking that I think we need to be thinking long-term. I'm just going to touch on fire. A lot of what I'm talking about is about insects, but isn't, right? It's about land management. And that's where Xerces really, we sometimes struggle. We love these animals and we want to sort of in some ways be species-based, but we also need to be focused landscape-based. And, both controlled and natural fire are vital for maintaining biodiversity. And prescribed fire is a really important tool for maintaining these systems and minimizing large catastrophic fires and maintaining biodiversity. And logging can be part of that, but it's not a substitute for it. If you combine some thinning with prescribed fire at the right time, at the right place, that can really work. It can make a resilient forest. But we do need a lighter touch on our forests, and we especially need a lighter touch after wildfire. We often go in and salvage log because people are like, well, it's already burned, so let's salvage it. And this is incredibly detrimental to forest insects and the birds that eat them. It compacts soils. It impacts rivers and streams and other water bodies. But it's not just about forests again. Managing, protecting all natural spaces, whether they be prairies, whether they be wetlands, whether they be forests, everything in between. And I want to point out that often we get stuck in the restoration space, and there's a lot of land to restore. But it is more efficacious and less expensive to protect what remains and manage it to increase biodiversity and ensure that we're capturing as much carbon as possible. So we need to really focus on that. And we need to stop doing large-scale habitat destruction and disruption. We really need to move away from that. So one thing many people don't know is that federal and state agencies periodically spray large amounts of insecticides to control native grasshoppers and Mormon crickets on mostly public land in the West, Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, even wildlife refuges. And on average, we're spraying anywhere from 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 acres a year. But in some years, like in 2021, we sprayed 1 million acres in Montana alone. And these are broad spectrum insecticides that kill grasshoppers, but also kill a variety of other insects. And grasshoppers are actually one of the favored food sources for many, many, many rangeland birds. So Xerces is really has been focused on this issue actually for the last 20 years and is really making change. And this is a nature-based climate solution because just by letting nature do what nature should do, that is a massive improvement. And my staff has been able to work with federal land managers to prohibit now almost 20 million acres of land from being sprayed. areas like this, that this is the water supply for Albuquerque. It's got wilderness study areas in it. It's incredibly diverse, and it was going to be sprayed because of a perceived grasshopper outbreak. That place was not sprayed, and in the future we're making sure that it won't. And interestingly, there was no grasshopper outbreak. They were like, grasshopper outbreak imminent. We got to get out the planes. We got to spray toxic insecticides. When we stopped this project, nothing happened. And the cool thing is that research and dialogue regarding grasshopper management really has shifted the discussion now. And it's taken 20 years to do this, but it shifted the discussion from just treating grasshoppers when we see them out on the landscape to how can we prevent, monitor, and manage them in a way that has a much less of an impact on these lands. But we also need to think about our aquatic systems, right? If we look at a lot of IUCN or NatureServe rankings, many of the most at-risk invertebrate groups rely on freshwater systems. So we do need to focus on terrestrial systems, but we also need a clear focus on these aquatic areas. You know, we need to protect and restore floodplains, wetlands, rivers and streams. And Xerces also does a lot of riparian restoration, which can really cool streams. It's a really important nature-based climate solution. But there are some unique climate solutions that people probably don't think about. I love this picture because it really shows something important. You can see mayflies on these freshwater mussels, and this is actually a picture taken from a river in Oregon. It is not in a tank. But freshwater mussels are sometimes called the coral reefs of rivers and streams. They provide diversity, complexity, and they filter a huge amount of water. Another term one of my staff came up with was the Brita filters of our fresh water. And studies show that healthy freshwater mussel beds, which sometimes can be 30, 40, 50, 60 years old, these freshwater mussels are probably 20 or 30 years old right here, right? So these grow a long, long time. But we see an increase in diversity and abundance of aquatic insects and other aquatic macroinvertebrates. And actually, there's data that shows where you have good freshwater mussel beds, we see more recruitment of juvenile salmon because they have more to eat. So we have been working across the West to ensure that we protect, restore, and in some cases move freshwater mussels out of harm's way. Last year, we moved more than 20,000 freshwater mussels out of the way of both projects that would harm them, but also restoration projects that would harm them, like removing dams. This is really, really important from a aquatic insect, aquatic macroinvertebrate point of view. Another animal I talk a lot about, it's funny, again, I'm not talking about insects, is beaver. They're incredible. Beaver, these nature-based juggernauts, right? They create wetlands, store water, mitigate floods, help mitigate droughts, filter pollution, capture carbon, and they increase diversity both in the aquatic system and in the terrestrial systems that are around them. And it's amazing, some of these aerial photos, and I should put one in my talk, and I will for the next one, after a fire, that you'll see these spots across the landscape from aerial photography that are green after a fire. And in most cases, those are where the beaver dams were. But we have between 10 and 15% of the beavers we had pre-European times. Many states are stepping up. Xerces helped pass a bill that helps protect beaver. In Oregon, other states are stepping up. People are reintroducing beaver, but this is a incredible nature-based climate solution that will directly help insects and other invertebrates. So we need to protect, restore, manage natural areas, but we also need to work within agriculture. Much of our agriculture is done really in a wrong way. We're maximizing cropping in monocultures. We're maximizing pesticides and chemical fertilizer and soil degradation and so much more. The cool thing is that I don't think we'll ever reach all farmers, but many farmers do want to step up because they do see the benefit to habitat, to soil health, to food security, and some of them to carbon capture. And nature-based climate solutions in agriculture can do all of this. But a lot of times, nature-based climate solutions and what the USDA calls climate smart ag simply focuses on cover crops, diversifying crop rotations, reduced tillage. These are all really, really good practices, and they do capture some carbon, but they don't provide for insect diversity or really abundance in most cases. And I've made the case in writing and in person with the USDA that climate smart agriculture needs to stop neglecting biodiversity. Because if we truly want to make agriculture climate smart, we have to also focus on permanent habitat. So Xerces does focus on cover crops and these things, but we also focus on permanent habitat. And one of the ways we do that is, but not the only way, is through hedgerows. Hedgerows are amazing from a farming point of view. Number one, they don't take up much space. So you're not taking crops often out of the cropping system because they're often planted along roadsides or ditches, often in places that are hard to farm anyway. And they're incredible. They provide a huge amount of habitat for pollinators, nesting resources, butterfly host plants, but also, help minimize dust. They're living snow fences. They're pretty easy to plant. They're easy to maintain, and they're easy to keep over the long term. And they're also incredible at capturing carbon. A couple studies have shown the amazing amount of carbon capture that hedgerows have, which one study showed that if we planted on the edges of farms across California farmland, we would capture enough carbon to reach up to 12% of California's ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goals. And again, this is just along all of the edges of these farms, minimizing taking crops out of production. And so we've been working on hedgerows for now almost 2 decades, but we wanted to look a little deeper in how could we connect habitats across the Central Valley in California, providing habitat and connecting habitat using linear plantings, which we do a lot of. So we worked with the University of Nevada, Reno, to do a modeling project to see could we connect landscapes across this pretty impacted landscape. So this is just a map of the Central Valley. It used to be an amazing place with grizzly bears and condors and wetlands and riparian forests and giant lakes. And now it's been drained, it's been flattened, and it is mostly cropping for agriculture. Can we move across this landscape? Especially when we've also found that much of this landscape's toxic. Another study we did with the University of Nevada, Reno was to look at milkweed plants across landscapes in the Central Valley. We didn't find a single milkweed plant that didn't have some pesticides. And actually, unfortunately, we found about a third of milkweed plants in the Central Valley. And this was across landscapes from natural areas to commercial ag to organic ag to towns and cities. About a third of the milkweed were actually lethal to the animals that need to feed on them. So we've got to deal with habitat and we have to deal with pesticides at the same time. And we have to see whether we can connect these habitats, both creating habitat and connecting habitat across the landscape. So to do this, we developed a tool with flower visitors in mind that uses land use information, lethality from pesticides, and expert opinion on insect movement. And remember, it is a model, so models in my mind are never perfect, but I think it's can give us some ideas about how to move and where to put in habitat so that animals can move across these landscapes. And it is pretty unique in that it considers pesticide application rates to estimate resistance. We do know that many of these pesticides kill or cause sublethal effects, which affect fecundity often of these insects. So that we felt was impeding across these landscapes. So we needed to look deeply into the pesticides. But I'm not going to go much deeper in this, but the model really showed that if you put in these margins and if you work with farmers to minimize pesticide impacts, you can greatly improve the amount of habitat and the number of margins and the connectivity across these landscapes. So, connectivity like this is a really just showing this because this is a typical almond farm. And this is a more than a mile long hedgerow that we put in. So this model is helping us to understand where we can place habitats and how we can decrease pesticide use. And it's pretty amazing. The study actually found that over 1 million acres of habitat could be added to the Central Valley. Again, drainage ditches, field edges, borders. But it also definitely showed us that we have to deal with pesticides. Beyond causing biodiversity loss, pesticides are pretty major greenhouse gases. Both the production and the application of pesticides send, more carbon up into the air. So we need to have this focus. Now, as I mentioned, Xerces has been partnering with folks in California for a long time, kind of beginning in 2006. And so we started then to look at hedgerows and this concept and how we might add more of this. Claire Kremen's work clearly shows that hedgerows immediately increase abundance of insects and that over time it increases the diversity of insects in these hedgerows as they get to be older. So they're really meaningful. And then I mentioned the carbon capture. So Xerces has a multi-pronged approach, right, to working with farmers. And much of it is about plants, right? So for us to be successful, we need a lot of plant materials. So we work with native plant nurseries to help understand how to grow some of these plants that we need, to understand pest issues in production of these plants, to try to help reduce production costs, and then increase the availability of these plants. We have a lot of work working with native plant nurseries. And we do a lot of outreach and education to get people to understand the importance of these habitats, whether they're hedgerows, flowering meadows, and why farmers should appreciate them and how they benefit from them. But we go beyond, as I said, outreach and education. We know that one-on-one assistance leads to successful conservation. Farmers know how to farm. They're really smart people, but they often have not done habitat projects where they're planting diverse plantings. Most crops are a crop, not 20 crops that you're all growing in one place, which is really a habitat. And we know that our work has really helped to propel farmers kind of to take that next step and do meaningful habitat projects. And we've got a lot of folks across the country doing this. We've got over 20 partner biologists specifically working with NRCS and doing many projects. In 2025 alone. They supported over 578 projects and wrote 142 farm specific plans. But this is the work. The reason I'm telling you this, we have to be talking to the farmers. We have to be working directly with them, or we don't see adoption of these practices. The other thing we've been working to do is to show farmers how important these practices are. And this is something the agency calls simultaneous optimization of conservation practices, which we call stacking benefits. How many benefits can we get from our habitat project? Soil health, carbon sequestration, water conservation, climate resilience, and pollinators and biodiversity in ag. And so we do these pilot projects, or we do sort of these mini studies across the country. We've got projects in the Pacific Northwest, Intermountain West, Midwest, Northeast, California, where we come in and look at farms and do pitfall traps, do soil samples, use electromagnetic sensors to get at, are we stacking benefits? And of course, we're looking also at insect abundance and using some technologies, because we can't be out on all of these farms, technologies where we can monitor biodiversity index and and evenness, because we can't always be out with a net or a pan trap, nor should we be always out with pan trap when we don't need to be killing insects unneeded. And so the important thing is to take this information, and we often can show in real time that farmers are getting these multiple benefits: increase in abundance and diversity of pollinators, often other beneficial insects that are parasitoids or predators of crop pest, carbon capture, improved soil water holding capacity, all of that. We also are incentivizing this work because we know that farmers, they have a tight margin. And so we have things like our Be Better Certified, which is a third-party certification, which when you get this certification, actually it is easier to get some of your products into places like Walmart, like Kroger's, like Whole Foods. We're also working with companies to directly incentivize this work. Much of our work through what we call the Living Farms Project is getting funded by folks like General Mills to work with their supply chain to put in huge, in some cases, really, really large projects. And, working with companies, working with NRCS, working directly with farmers. We've now planted 125 miles of hedgerows and restored over 2.1 million acres of habitat across farmland, over 1,000 projects across the West. And they're often like this, right? So this is from that picture showing that, in almonds where there isn't much habitat, but we were able to work with a farmer that supplies silk, almond milk, to find pre-existing basin. This thing is 50 feet wide. When it's fully grown, it's going to have this pollinator meadow in the middle and a large woody plant hedgerow on either side. And it's over a mile long. It's a lot of habitat and it provides a lot of connectivity. So the idea is we're just going from this to this to this. By the way, this is a cover crop that we've developed that has native resources in it. Most cover crops are non-native plants, and we wanted to develop a cover crop that would provide more resources for our native insects. And this kind of thing. This is in Oregon. This is spring. This is fall. You know, we need these habitats to support these animals over the entire year. And projects across the country, from dryland wheat. This is a huge project over, you know, thousands of acres, to prairie restoration in Iowa, you know, smaller vegetable farms in Minnesota, biodynamic farms in New York, all of those. So we need natural areas, we need farms, but we also need a focus on cities. 80% of us live in cities, and nature-based solutions are really resource efficient to build resilient, vibrant, and future-proof cities. But they also provide nature close to where people live. And if we want people to care about nature, we need to get them out into wild nature, but having nature close to home is really important. I grew up in Omaha. I'm the youngest of 10 kids. We didn't go on far-flung trips. I found my nature a block and a half from my house where they had not yet built houses. It was a remnant of what used to be along the Missouri River, close to the Missouri River, with a little prairie, a little ephemeral stream, a little forest. I basically lived there from the time I was 6 or 7 to the time I was 13. I think girls got my attention at that point. And it's where I learned to love insects. We need to bring this nature in so we can get people to love insects, to love nature. I mentioned these projects, you know, nature-based climate solutions are less expensive than hard infrastructure projects, especially in built spaces. And they're really important. You know, residential and commercial development is the third most frequently cited threat to species in the IUCN. Yet where we do projects, we know we can increase diversity and abundance of insects, other invertebrates, birds, other animals. So trees are essential. Trees. But we need to move in a different direction with trees. Next time you go out in your neighborhood and you're going down a street, take a look at the street trees, and I bet in many cases you're going to see one type of street tree for entire blocks, sometimes multi-blocks, sometimes whole neighborhoods. We need to move to planting trees that are diverse, so a diversity of trees. We need to also plant native trees where possible. And we need to think about trees that are important for biodiversity. You know, some trees flower and support a lot of insects. So we need to move away from the old dynamic of street trees to a new dynamic that is built on diversity. But we also need to move to shrubs. You know, in cities, we have seen in our work that people are either planting meadows or they're planting trees. And we've really been pushing shrubs. Shrubs can fit in places where trees cannot. And they have more value per square meter for both carbon capture and for helping with biodiversity. They actually, we've now planted some hedgerows under power lines where trees would have to be, you know, cut off because of that power line. So they really are an underutilized aspect of conservation in cities. But lawns, we need to rip out lawns. We've got 40 million acres of lawns across the US. And these are places that are often overloaded with pesticides and fertilizers. Even just the impact of gas mowers. Gas mowers are carbon producing. It's crazy how much greenhouse gases just mowing a lawn puts into because they have two-stroke engines. And meadows sequester a lot more carbon and provide for a lot more biodiversity. This one study measured terrestrial invertebrate biomass at 25 times higher in a native planting that replaced a lawn. That was within 2 years. We also need to protect landscapes in these places. Again, protecting, managing, and restoring landscapes is a lot less expensive than planting new ones. So we need to do that wherever possible in the built spaces, towns, and cities. But we need to maximize parks and green spaces. We need to move away again, even in parks, from these green grass parks. Half the time that nobody's even walking on. It's one thing if it's a soccer field, it's another if it's just a blank slate with nothing on it. We are getting good adoption of increasing native plant diversity in our parks and green spaces in our cities. Roadsides, roadsides can be a really valuable resource. We've got millions of acres of roadsides, and these have been shown to be linear areas that animals, butterflies especially, move along. And we know that if you have intact, diverse roadsides, there's less likelihood that insects go out into traffic because they're not looking as far for the resources they need. So there's less roadkill. Business parks are another thing. We've gotten business parks to move away from grass as well. We need a lot more of this. And then I think what's interesting is a few years ago, a couple decades ago, green roofs were a big thing. We need to get back to it. They are really useful stormwater tool and a great nature-based climate solution. I will just say last that we need to move away from pesticides in towns and cities as well. USGS often finds that we use more pesticides per acre in urban and suburban area for this perfect lawn, for a perfect rose, and we really need to move away from all the pesticides we use. Just very quickly, a couple holistic projects that bring in all of this that we're really excited about is our Bee City USA. We now actually have 465 bee cities and bee campuses. If you are on a campus in the US, or you can look into this and get your campus to become a Bee Campus USA. And the work they're doing is incredibly meaningful. With our help, they've completed 7,000 pollinator habitat projects. They've reached a lot of people, over 1.7 million people. And we've seen really neat adoption of reduced risk pesticide practices, from eliminating all pesticides to moving to organic to halting cosmetic use. We're seeing really great efforts in bee cities. Another very quick, and then I'm done, but I wanted to point this out. We are working to remove barriers to successful restoration, to get people who may not have been involved in restoration to do restoration in the landscapes that they love. And we call this the Plant Kit program. So Xerces provides free climate smart native plants to project partners who are willing to do the work, right? The time, the labor, and provide the land. And we know this is breaking down barriers, because there's a lot of barriers to putting in habitat: the cost of materials, uncertainty about what to plant, the lack of access to these native plants, and the lack of technical knowledge and experience with restoration. And we work to deal with all of those through this program. So the idea, of course, is to minimize or to have less habitat loss. So we're adding plants to the landscape as well as working with folks to create habitat for these animals beyond just floral resources. These are bee-safe plants. We work with nurseries to ensure that no harmful pesticides are used on these plants, and we work with the recipients to ensure that where they're placed, they will not be impacted. These are locally climate adaptive native plants that we're working with nurseries to bring to market. And the cool thing is that we're bringing new plants to market that then the nurseries can just sell outright, so that we've got actually more important plants for insects. And then these kits are really diverse, often 15 to 20 different species in a small habitat kit. We also, as I mentioned, lean in. We support projects from planning to site preparation to installation. Some people don't need help, but some people do. So we'll lean in to ensure that these are installed and can be managed over the long term. And it's been really successful. We've supported over 2,000 projects and given away over 600,000 plants. So if you see an area here, look at our website where you live and you want to apply for a plant kit. We're expanding the program in Oregon this year and starting the program in Nebraska. So those will be 2 new programs that we start. I think Nebraska may actually not start until 2027 because we're just starting, and we'll be working with the nurseries. And all of these habitats are amazing because they really do inspire the public. We have seen, both with our habitat kit work as well as our other work, once you plant habitat in a neighborhood, people start to go to their neighbors. They start to try to get people to plant more. They get interested in insects. They become community scientists. It's really, really important from the people part of it as well. So just the last slide. The good news, I feel, is that this stuff works. We live in a world that's kind of messed up at the moment. But we can make a difference, and insects are resilient. The work we've done shows that where you put in habitat, you see positive outcomes. You increase the abundance, you increase the diversity of these animals, even on small scales. I did this on my yard where we moved in a decade ago. It was all bluegrass and almost all non-native plantings. We, got rid of 80% of the bluegrass. I had kids. I wanted them to run around on the little patch of grass. We replaced all of the landscape with native plants, as well as things like raspberries and blueberries and columnar apples, things we wanted to eat. I do a very non-statistical survey of the number of I'm going to use species, but I don't go to species. Sometimes I can't tell whether there's a male bee or a female bee, or sometimes I'm sure I'm confused. But the number of types of animals in my landscape, I counted 13 the first year I lived here. I counted almost 140 10 years later. This is a 50 by 75 lot. If we can do that there, we can do it in my yard, we can do this anywhere. It will help. We just need to get a lot more people. So anyway, with that, I didn't talk much about insects, so maybe people are disappointed, but I just believe that nature-based climate solutions are a win for people, a win for climate, a win for biodiversity, a win for insects, and it's something we need to lean into more as a society. So with that, thank you.